Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, 28th chapter, text number 31. Tasyavalokamadhikam kripayati ghora tapatrayopashamanaya nisrishtamakshno snigdhasmitanugunitam vipula prasadam ध्यायेत् चिरं विपुलभावनया गुहायाम्. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. The yogis should contemplate with full devotion the compassionate glances frequently cast by the Lord's eyes, for they soothe the most fearful threefold agonies of His devotees. His glances, accompanied by loving smiles, are full of abundant grace. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As long as one is in conditional life in the material body, it is natural that he will suffer from anxieties and agonies. One cannot avoid the influence of material energy even when one is on the transcendental plane. Sometimes disturbances come, but the agonies and anxieties of the devotees are at once mitigated when they think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in His beautiful form or the smiling face of the Lord. The Lord bestows innumerable favors upon His devotee, and the greatest manifestation of His grace is His smiling face, which is full of compassion for His pure devotees. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport.
So we are seeing here Lord Kapila's instructions to his mother about how a yogi should meditate on the Lord. And in today's verse, Lord Kapila is saying, Tasyavalokam adhikam krupaya. Tasya, the Lord's avalokam, His glances. Adhika krupaya. It is full of mercy, it is full of compassion. Ati ghora tapatraya upashamanaya nisrishthama. And from his eyes, akshaha, nisrishtham, what he is casting. Ati ghora tapatraya upashamanaya. Material world is a place for tapatraya, threefold miseries. And these threefold miseries are not just some light miseries. Sometimes it can become ati ghora tapatraya and upashamanaya. But the Lord's glances, akshno nisrishtham avalokam, is upashamanaya, tapatrayon upashamanaya. It soothes the heart of a devotee. And also his snigdhasmitha, and his loving smile. Snigdhasmitha anugunitam, his glances accompanied by the smile, loving smile. Vipula prasadam, it is full of grace. It is abundant grace. Very nice expression Prabhupada has used. Abundant grace. That aspect of the Lord, very compassionate, casting his glances, which can soothe the miseries of this material world, combined with the smiling, loving, smiling face, which is full of grace. Vipula prasadam dhyaye. The yogi should meditate on. And chiram, for a long time, always. Dhyaye chiram vipula bhavanaya guhayam. And whether it should be done in a mechanical way? No. Vipula bhavanaya, with full of devotion. Guhayam, in his heart. So, The yogi should contemplate, dhyayet, with full devotion, vipula bhavanaya guhayam, the compassionate glances, adhikam krupayavalokam, cast by the Lord's eyes, akshnoho, for they soothe, upashamanaya, the most fearful threefold agonies, atighora tapatrayam, of his devotees. His glances, akshnoho, avalokam, accompanied by anugunitam, loving smiles, snigdhasmitha, are full of abundant grace, vipula prasadam. So, such a beautiful explanation of the Lord's disposition and how he is so compassionate, and the yogi is expected to meditate on that aspect of the Lord. So here it is described that the Lord's casting of the glances, it is full of krupaya, and it is vipula prasadam, it is full of compassion for the devotees. Actually, the Lord's compassion, Lord's mercy, Lord's grace works at various levels. At the very first level is to recognize the impermanence of material existence. Many times people are not even aware that this material world is miserable. Krishna explains, for one to realize that this material world is miserable, one has to be intelligent. If one is foolish, he cannot realize this. So it takes intelligence to see the reality of this material world, that it is miserable. And similarly, that this material world is miserable and it is temporary. To realize that, it requires the mercy of the Lord. That is why in the famous prayer that Lochan Das, Narottam Das Thakur has composed, Ar kabe nitai chander karuna hoibe, samsara vasana more kabe tuchcha hobe. Samsara vasana means material desires, material inclinations. Vasanas means the inclination which push us to act in a materialistic way. So, Ar kabe nitai chander karuna hoibe. It is actually Nityananda Prabhu's karuna, Lord's karuna, that one can be freed from the material desires and not be following the material desires, make the material desires the center of our life. That's what materialists do. So to come to that understanding, one requires the mercy of the Lord. That this world is miserable, the world is temporary, I should seek something higher than this. To come to that level itself requires mercy of the Lord. So that is how when the materialists are trying to use this material world for sense gratification in different ways, if they are blessed by the Lord, they begin to perceive that this is miserable and temporary. The next stage is when one realizes that yes, I am actually a spirit soul and I am in an incompatible environment which is the material atmosphere. So this is the stage of understanding Aham Brahmasmi. Aham Brahmasmi is to recognize that I am Brahman, meaning I am spirit and not this matter. All along I was thinking I am the matter, I am this body, I am the senses, and I must expand the gratification of these senses, and that is what my life is about. That's what I was thinking. But now I realize by the mercy of the Lord that this material world is temporary. And now I am realizing the next understanding is I am not this material body, I am not part of this material world. I have a spiritual existence, and that is explained as Aham Brahmasmi. Actually, that Aham Brahmasmi is a beginning of the spiritual realization. Because all along we are thinking I am matter, I am material, I am part of this material world. No, I am spirit. That is also a blessing of the Lord. But actually that's not adequate. Prabhupada gives a nice example. Suppose there is a man who is very rich, and he is always thinking, oh, I'm a very rich man and I have a lot of wealth, I have money in the bank, I have this, assets and all of that. That itself won't make him so happy. It may give him some happiness, of course, that he is having the understanding that I am a rich man. Next, he has to act with his richness. Then there is more realization and manifestation of the pleasure. So Aham Brahmasmi, understanding that I am spirit and not matter, is another level of the mercy of the Lord, and that brings us to one level of spiritual happiness. The next level is I am spirit, I am a spiritual being, and I come from the Lord. I am part and parcel of the Lord. And that Lord is in the heart of every living entity. And that realization is the Aham Brahmasmi, is the realization that I am spirit. And the next realization is that I am spirit, but I am part and parcel of the Supreme Spirit, or the Supreme Super Soul in the heart. And that is the stage of the dhyana. That is what we are talking about in this reading in this chapter. How that yogi should meditate on the Lord who is seated in the heart of every living entity, and what are his characteristics, and how the devotee, how the yogi should meditate on that form of the Lord in his mind, fix the form of the Lord in his mind, and because that's the form of the Lord, transcendental Lord, and when you meditate on that for a long time, dhyayet chiram, with full of devotion, then one will have that realization of that Paramatma. And that is also another stage of spiritual happiness. And Krishna explains this in the Bhagavad Gita, how the yogi should do this. Because the mind is uncontrolled. The mind may go here and there. How one comes to the experience of transcendental pleasure is explained very nicely by Krishna in these 3 verses in the 6th chapter. And this is relevant to us also as devotees. Krishna is saying, Yatho yatho nischalati manas chanchalam asthiram tatas tatho niyamyaitat atmanyeva vasham nayet. This is a standard thing that we also experience, isn't it? Mind is running here, there. Yatho yatho nischalati manas, because chanchalam asthiram. Manas chanchalam asthiram. Because the mind is asthira and flickering, and chanchala, unsteady and flickering. So the mind is running here, there. So what should the yogi do? And what should the devotee do? For us also it's very relevant. Tatho niyamyaitat. By a niyama, by a regulation. Don't let the mind go here and there. By a niyama, regulate the mind, and atmanyeva vasham nayet, and bring it under the control of the Atma, the super soul, or bring it under the control of the intelligence, to meditate on the form of the Lord in the case of a yogi. Atmanyeva vasham nayet. Niyamyaitat. Niyama means by a regulation. Just like when you're driving a car, you're supposed to drive on the left side. You may be tempted to say, let me drive on the right side. There is less traffic there or something. But you cannot. It's a regulation. You have to drive on the left side. So in the same way, niyamyaitat atmanyeva vasham nayet. By a regulation, we should do it. What happens when we do this? When we don't allow the mind to go here and there, but regulate the mind? Krishna explains in the next verse. When we do that, prashanta manasyenam, the mind becomes peaceful. If we let the mind go according to its desires to run here and there after sense gratification, we will be very disturbed. Prashanta manasyenam, the mind becomes very, very satisfied. Prashanta. And yoginam sukhamuttamam. The yogi begins to experience uttama sukha. Uttama sukha refers to transcendental pleasure. Uttama means uttama. It is beyond the tamas, which is material. So, if we have to experience transcendental happiness, the number one principle is we have to calm the mind. Very nicely, Krishna says, Upaiti shantha rajasam. Shantha rajasam. Otherwise, the rajas, the mode of passion, is really agitating our consciousness, our minds and senses. And shantha rajasam. When the passions are quieted, then upaiti sukhamuttamam yogim upaiti sukhamuttamam upaiti, he will be able to experience. Then he is said to be Brahma Bhutam. He is on a spiritual level. Akalmasham, freed from the contaminations. How did the akalmasham happen? Because of his meditation on the transcendental form of the Lord. When he does that meditation, and when the mind is going here and there, he niyamyaitat atmanyeva vasham nayet. By regulation, he controls the mind, and then the mind becomes pacified. Prashanta manasyenam yoginam sukhamuttamam upaiti shanta rajasam. Then he will be able to experience the transcendental pleasure. This is true for yogis, this is true for devotees. If we want to have a glimpse of that spiritual pleasure, most important, the fundamental requirement is we must control the senses, control the mind. Then what happens? Then Krishna says, Yunjans evam sadatmanam. So this kind of a control of the mind, quietening of the mind, if it happens now and then, we will only have a little bit of an experience. But if it is Yunjan evam sadatmanam, if one practices this always, sadatmanam, not just once in a way, but it becomes we are very serious about it, and we want to practice this always. Yunjan evam sadatma. Yunjan evam sadatmanam. Yogi vigata kalmashaha. He becomes more and more freed from the contaminations. Then what happens? Sukhena Brahma samsparsham. Brahma samsparsham. Now he comes in touch with Brahman. And what is that coming in touch with that Brahman? Sukhena. It is a joyful experience. Sukhena Brahma samsparsham atyantam gunam sukhamashnute. And he experiences great joy. So earlier it was an understanding that Aham Brahmasmi. That's the Brahman understanding. Now the yogi has moved up. He has come in touch with Sukhena Brahma samsparsham. He has come in touch with that Brahman. It's a much higher level of realization. And Sukham Atyantam Sukham Ashnute, and he experiences transcendental joy. So this is the stage of a yogi who is meditating on the Lord, as Kapila Deva is describing, and he comes in contact with that spiritual truth, Brahman, because he is meditating. That is another level of mercy. Here, the Lord is described here as Vipula Prasadam. The Lord's disposition is that he wants to give abundant grace. What more he can give? Yes, he can give even more than Brahma Samsparsham, Sukhena Brahma Samsparsham. And that is when a person progresses further from dhyana, from meditation on the Paramatma, to the next stage of devotional service. And when not only meditates, but also begins to associate with the Lord, has a transcendental association and performs activities in the association of, that is considered to be the highest mercy of the Lord. That is why Lord Brahma says in his prayers after the Brahma Vimohana Leela, he says, Aho bhagyam, Nanda Gopa Vrajaukasam, Yan Mitram Paramanandam, Purnam Brahma Sanatanam. Now, Purnam Brahma. Earlier it was just Aham Brahmasmi, just a realization of I'm not matter and I'm spirit. Then the next stage was Brahma Samsparsham. A yogi came in touch with that Brahman. Now, Purnam Brahma Sanatanam, complete Purnam Brahman, that spiritual truth, spiritual reality in his completeness, Purnam Brahmam Sanatanam, and who is the source of Paramanandam, an unlimited happiness, Yan Mitram. This is, Lord Brahma is referring to the Gopas and the Gopis in Vrindavan. So he's saying, how fortunate they are! Aho bhagyam, Nanda Gopa Vraja Okasam. Vraja Okasam. Okasam means the residents, inhabitants of Vraja. Nanda Gopa and the residents of Vrindavan. Aho bhagyam. Because that transcendental Lord, Purnam Brahma Sanatanam, Yan Mitram, he has become the friend, he is living with them. How fortunate they are. So like this, these are the different levels of compassion the Lord can show according to our ability to receive the compassion, mercy of the Lord. Some people are so interested in sense gratification and absorbed in the material world. For them, what can the Lord do? And if he bestows a little mercy, they'll begin to understand that it is impermanent and full of miseries. And if the Lord shows more mercy, then they begin to understand, I'm a spirit soul, Aham Brahmasmi. Even that is not enough. Further, Brahma Samsparsham, Sukhena Brahma Samsparsham. And if one is further blessed, one can understand that, yes, I can associate with the Lord by pure devotional service, by the signs of pure devotional service. And that is what Bhagavatam is preparing us to understand and appreciate. And another important point that Prabhupada mentions in this purport is, because Kapila Deva has said, Ati ghora tapatraya upashamanaya nisrushtam akshnoho. And Prabhupada has explained in the purport how a devotee faces the miseries in the material world. Because the material nature is like that. When one is in the material world, we have to experience these agonies. Ati ghora tapatrayam. Agonies, and one cannot avoid the influence of material energy, and one has to suffer anxieties and agonies. Even when one is on the transcendental plane, Even when one comes to transcendental plane, one should expect that there will be miseries and anxieties and agonies in the material world. But for a devotee, when he meditates on and when he sees that snidhasmitha anugunitam vipula prasadam, when he meditates on that, when he has that realization, that then atighora tapatrayam upashamanaya, it soothes his heart. So when Srila Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, Prabhupada, a pure devotee, devotees had an opportunity to see how he was experiencing and how he was when he faced difficulties and how he experienced it. In 1974, Srila Prabhupada came to Vrindavan. At that time, the Krishna Balaram temple was still under construction. His quarters were built behind, and all the devotees were packed up in that one room, which is now the visitors' room where Prabhupada used to visit later. That's where the Matajis would stay. And then in the room where he used to sleep, that is where he used to sleep, he would translate. And there was another small room. His secretaries and servants, they would live there. And like that, everyone was huddled up, and it was a construction site. And August, somewhere there was Janmashtami. And then Prabhupada's Vyas Puja was there. There were many devotees, and they observed. And soon after that, Prabhupada became very, very sick. And in 2 days, he became so sick, he was having 104 temperature. So doctors were called, and the doctors came and saw that Prabhupada was having malaria. And he would be lying down and he would be moaning. There would be painful moans. So like that, Prabhupada was experienced this kind of very serious illness. And August, that is, the temperature was high, very humid. Now and then there was rain, and it was very uncomfortable. And even the other devotees, Prabhupada had one servant, Shruta Kirti was his servant, he also got malaria. And after that, there was another devotee who was called in to play the role of his servant, and he also got malaria. And many devotees were having malaria, dysentery, all of these kind of things, and the weather was humid, hot, very uncomfortable. It is actually at that time, all kinds of insects come in Vrindavan. There are times that once in a few years, this big kind of a flying, and they come in millions. Once in a few years they come. So like this, all kinds of insects come, and all of these insects were coming all over, and you can imagine Western devotees, even for Indians, it would be so uncomfortable for us. And these devotees were going through all of these miseries. And Prabhupada was also suffering. At that time, Prabhupada said something very significant. He said, "My suffering is because of the sins of ISKCON leaders. 80% of them are not following the regulative principles." And when Prabhupada said that, it was like so heavy. Everyone felt so bad that, my God, everyone was examining oneself. What am I doing? And because of my not following the regulative principles, Srila Prabhupada is suffering. And then it was very hot, and sometimes they would bring the cot outside so that it would be a little cooler, and with a mosquito net, and Prabhupada would be lying there, and devotees had to pass in front to go to the toilet and washroom and come back. And every time they would hear Prabhupada moaning now and then. And it was so painful for devotees. And then Prabhupada stopped eating. He did not want to eat anything. He was just fasting. And it went on and on. He would just take Horlicks and sometimes milk. Only that much, and nothing else. He would not eat. And he became very frail. He could not walk to the washroom. Two devotees had to carry him. That was his state. And at that time, not only all of these kind of miseries, difficulties, Prabhupada was having a lot of difficulties with the management of the devotees also. There was a GBC, and that GBC, when all of these kind of difficulties were coming, he said, Srila Prabhupada, I can't bear this anymore, and he left. Then another GBC was brought. He was there for a few days, and he left. And a third GBC was brought. He was also there for a few days. Even he could not bear. He left. Prabhupada then said, I will be the GBC now. So that was the kind of a situation Prabhupada was going through. And then at that time, the news came that the governor of Uttar Pradesh was visiting Vrindavan, and somebody known to Prabhupada had made an arrangement that he should come and visit Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was on the bed, barely able to move. His speech was so soft, he could not speak well also. So at that time, the news came that Akbar Ali Khan, he was a respected man in Indian politics, and he was the governor, and so he was going to come. So Prabhupada was lying on the bed, and he started giving directions, speaking very, very softly. He said, make this arrangement, make that arrangement. And then Prabhupada said, I will go and greet him. And the devotees said, no, Srila Prabhupada, in this frail condition, you should not, we will manage. We will tell him that you are very sick. And Prabhupada said, no, he is an important man. And those days, it was so, our Indian situation was so bad. You cannot buy cement in the free market. You had to get an approval, you had to get a quota from the government. And it was a huge amount of hardship to build the temple. So Prabhupada thought that he will get an opportunity to ask him to approve some of the, some cement and all of the steel and cement you had to buy in a quota. And so Prabhupada said, no, he's coming, he's an important man and I have to meet him. And so Prabhupada, they put a silk kurta on Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada had to put tilak. It took about 5 minutes because he could not just lift his hand and put tilak. He was in that kind of a state. And after putting the tilak, everything, and then he was about to be carried, again Prabhupada is asking, have I put tilak? He was having 104 degree temperature. He was not, when you are in that kind of a state, he had forgotten that he had put the tilak. So, and Prabhupada was lifted, carried in his chair and brought to the courtyard, and another chair was placed and a red carpet was rolled out, and in a few minutes time all the security, all of them were there, and the governor's car came, and the governor came walking on the red carpet and came to Prabhupada, and the devotees were all watching. They were doing kirtan also. And suddenly Srila Prabhupada stood up to receive him. His hands were shivering, legs were shivering. Prabhupada held his hand and shook his hands, and they spoke a little bit, and both of them sat down. And then Prabhupada asked the governor to speak, and then the governor spoke for a few minutes, and he said how the industries are very important for India and all of those kind of things. And then Prabhupada again he stood up, and he couldn't stand. He was holding on to the chair, and he spoke for another 20 minutes, telling how the importance of Krishna consciousness is, how according to Vedic conception, there are no different religions. There is only one religion because there is one God. And he gave all of those kind of ideas, and he spoke for 20 minutes. If you see in the Veda base, for those 20 days there is no talk by Srila Prabhupada. There is no letter writing by Prabhupada. Prabhupada is on for 2 weeks it went on. And he spoke for 20 minutes, and then he sat down and then had prasadam served to the governor. And then the governor had, and all his entourage, they all had prasadam. And then after a while, they all left. And Prabhupada was again lifted and brought back to the room. And his temperature was 105 degrees. So, in spite of all of these kind of difficulties, Prabhupada was enduring. And Prabhupada says in another conversation, he says, if one, when you are in the material world, miseries will come, anxieties will come, agonies will come. But if one is in knowledge, he will not be affected by those miseries. And he will think that, yes, these miseries may be there, but let me go on with my duty to serve the Lord. And we see that manifested here. Prabhupada was thinking, it is my duty, a big man is coming, I must receive him and I must ask him for some help for Krishna's service. And despite all of those kind of inconveniences, Prabhupada, the governor, and spoke to him and spoke on that occasion, all of these kind of things. So this is how a devotee, when he thinks about the Lord and his meditation on the Lord, all of these miseries becomes upashamaniya. He is soothed by the Lord's glances, by the Lord's association, and he goes on with his service. So these are inspiring examples that we must see and practice in our own lives. We will stop here. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki.